It happened so suddenly that for a moment even the clock on the kitchen wall seemed to stop ticking. Your sister deserves stability. You work remote. Move out. When the people you love the most choose someone else over you, silence becomes your strongest weapon. Stay with me, you need to hear how this unfolded. That was the sentence that cut through the room. Sharp, public, humiliating. Mom didn't even look up from the dishes when she said it. Her voice was casual, almost bored, as if she was telling me the weather forecast. 18 people sat scattered around the living room and dining area, holding half-empty coffee mugs and pretending to check their phones, each one trying not to look shocked. I felt a small sting behind my ribs, but I didn't flinch. I just blinked once, slowly, and placed my cup on the counter with steady fingers. My calmness surprised even me. Maybe because I already sensed this moment coming, the way you sense a storm hours before the first raindrop. The air smelled of cinnamon rolls my sister had burned earlier, and the whole room felt warm, too warm, like someone had turned the heat up just enough to make you uncomfortable. My sister sat on the arm of the sofa, swinging her expensive new sandals back and forth. She didn't make eye contact, but the smug little smile tugging at the corner of her mouth was enough. She had known this was coming. She had planned it. I straightened my spine just a little. Is that so? I said, my voice quiet but even. Mom sighed, still not looking at me. Well, yes. She needs stability. You work from home. You can live anywhere. Anywhere. That word floated in the air like smoke. To them, anywhere meant disposable, movable, unnecessary. I let the silence stretch, watching my sister tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, showing off her freshly manicured nails, pale pink, shiny, and absolutely paid for with my money. I recognized that shade. I had bought the same one for her birthday 2 months ago. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. Instead, something settled inside me, a stillness, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. A quiet part of me whispered, let them talk. Let them think they've won. I walked past the guests, offering them a polite nod. Some gave me sympathetic half-smiles, others looked away. The carpet felt different under my feet. When did they change this? And with whose money? Another detail I filed away quietly. As I moved toward the hallway, I noticed something I had missed before. The family photo wall. My picture, the one from my 35th birthday, was slightly crooked. Not tilted by accident, but shifted, almost pushed aside to make more space for the newer pictures of my sister and her big moments. A graduation, a vacation, a promotion she bragged about but never actually earned. A chill crawled up the back of my neck. Something was wrong here. More wrong than I had allowed myself to see. My room felt smaller than usual when I stepped inside. Or maybe the weight of their decision made everything feel tighter. The afternoon light filtered through the blinds, leaving dusty streaks across the old dresser. I moved around the room slowly, touching familiar objects. My reading lamp, my worn blanket, the small ceramic bowl I'd made in a pottery class years ago. Then I opened the drawer where I kept things no one knew I still had. Receipts. Bills. Bank statements. Tax forms. Copies of every repair invoice from the past 5 years. The leaking roof, the broken heater, the kitchen plumbing. Paper trails they all assumed I never kept. Paper trails that told a very different story. I didn't take them out yet. I simply rested my hand on the neat stack, my fingertips brushing the edges. A tiny smile, small enough that no one else would ever notice, touched my lips. There was something comforting in knowing that while they believed they were pushing me out, they didn't know the leverage sitting quietly in my bottom drawer. I packed slowly, carefully. Not because I had much to take, but because every small memory seemed to rise to the surface as I moved. The cardigan Mom bought me last winter, though she had scolded me for choosing the boring color. The book my sister borrowed and never returned, one of many. The framed recipe card from my grandmother, the only thing in the house no one tried to take from me because no one else wanted it. As I folded my things, I heard laughter from the living room. My sister's laugh, loud, carefree, triumphant. Something tightened in my gut, not anger, not hurt, something colder. Something steadier. I zipped my suitcase. The sound sliced through the quiet of my room. When I stepped back into the hallway, Mom finally looked at me. Her eyebrows lifted in mild surprise, as if she hadn't actually expected me to leave so easily. I didn't say a word. I simply walked toward the front door. My sister beat me there. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, wearing that same satisfied little smirk. the kind that made her look younger but not in a flattering way. I could smell her perfume, expensive and freshly applied. Another thing I had bought. "Oh wow," she said. "You actually took it seriously." I gave her a long level look. "You wanted stability. I'm giving it to you." She laughed, short and sharp. "Finally. You should have moved out ages ago." A few of the guests pretended to check their phones again. Some cleared their throats. No one spoke up. I stepped closer, close enough that she had to straighten her posture. My voice dropped to a soft whisper, the kind that makes people lean in without realizing it. "Be careful what you celebrate," I said. Her smirk faltered. Then before she could respond, I turned the doorknob. The cold air outside hit my face instantly. It smelled of rain on concrete, the kind of smell that makes you feel awake. Alive. A quiet part of me stirred, that same calm voice, steady and sure. "You're not losing anything. You're reclaiming." I carried my suitcase down the walkway, feeling the familiar cracks in the cement under my shoes. The evening sun dipped low behind the neighbors' trees, casting long shadows across the yard. My shadow stretched ahead of me, tall, purposeful. I reached my car and opened the trunk. As I lifted the suitcase, something made me glance back at the house. My sister was still standing in the doorway. Watching. Confident. But her confidence was built on assumptions. Assumptions she would soon regret. I closed the trunk gently, not slamming it. Quiet movements always unsettled her more than loud ones. Before getting into the car, I placed my hand on the hood and took a breath, steady and deep. I wasn't leaving empty-handed. Not with the documents I had. Not with what I knew. Not with what they didn't know I had already prepared. A single drop of rain landed on my cheek. The first sign of an approaching storm. How fitting. As I slid into the driver's seat, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief. Not sadness. Something stronger. A shift. A beginning. I turned the key. The engine hummed low and steady. Through the windshield, I saw Mom walk up behind my sister in the doorway. Her face looked unreadable, almost uneasy, as if some part of her knew this wouldn't end the way she imagined. I put the car in reverse. My sister tilted her head, giving me one last smug, dismissive smile, as if she believed my story had ended at that moment. But stories don't end when a door closes. Sometimes that's exactly where they begin. I backed out of the driveway slowly, deliberately, meeting her eyes until the very last second. And just before I turned away, I let my expression shift, barely, subtly, into the faintest smile. A smile that said, "You have no idea what's coming next." And then I drove away, leaving her standing in the doorway staring after me, unaware that this was the moment her victory actually started to collapse. The smile faded from my lips the moment my car turned the corner, leaving the house out of sight. It was like stepping out of a performance and back into myself. The quiet inside the car felt heavier than the suitcase in the trunk, and as I drove down the familiar street, the street lights flickered on one by one, soft yellow glows guiding me forward as if they too understood something had shifted. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. Instead, I reached across the passenger seat and pulled the small tote bag toward me, the one I had packed last, the one I never allowed anyone to touch. Inside it were things they never bothered to consider important. A pocket folder with elastic straps, a USB drive, and a small notebook filled with my neat cursive handwriting. Each item had its place. Each item meant something. Each item told a story my family thought I was too simple, too old, or too distracted to keep track of. They had underestimated me. And I had allowed them to. As I drove into the parking lot of the small motel near the highway, not glamorous, not expensive, but quiet, the first drops of rain started tapping the windshield. I checked in with a polite smile, took my room key and climbed the narrow staircase to the second floor. The hallway smelled faintly of old carpets and lemon cleaner. The air hummed with the distant buzz of vending machines. It wasn't home, but it was a place where no one could interrupt my thoughts. Inside my room, I placed the tote on the bed and sat down slowly, letting the silence settle around me. My knees ached a little from the long day, a familiar reminder of age, but nothing compared to the ache inside my chest. Not heartbreak. Something more like awakening. I slipped the elastic band off the folder. Papers spread across the quilted bedspread like pieces of a puzzle. Tax forms, receipts, printed bank statements, credit card transactions, repair invoices. I ran my fingertips along the edges of the documents, letting the weight of each year settle in my memory. 5 years of paying nearly everything. 5 years of being told, "You're so helpful, you don't mind, do you? We'll figure it out later." 5 years of doing quietly while they took loudly. My stomach tightened, not in anger but in recognition of a truth I had ignored for too long. I had carried the house. I had paid for it like a second job. And they had dismissed me like I was nothing more than a temporary tenant. I arranged the documents into categories: housing, repairs, utilities, miscellaneous. The order soothed me. Maybe because my life felt so disordered now. Maybe because this was something I could control. Maybe because I knew these papers were more powerful than any accusation or argument. As I placed the last document onto the table, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Mom. "We didn't want it to be like this. Call me." I stared at the screen for a long moment. A small tremor ran across my hand, not from fear but from the weight of everything unsaid between us. I set the phone face down on the bed. I wasn't ready to talk yet, not when the air was still thick with their words, still carrying the echo of my sister's laughter. Instead, I opened my notebook, the one with small checkboxes on every page. I had used it over the years to track expenses, appointments, reminders, and thoughts I didn't trust myself to forget. I flipped back until I found the entry from last fall. September 12th, heater repair. $645. Paid in full. They said they'd handle it. They didn't. I turned the page. February 22nd, roof leak. $1,870. Paid from my account after 3 weeks of delay on their end. Sister said she was busy. Another page. May 3rd, property tax. Covered their share again. And so on. My handwriting felt like a witness statement to my own life. Every line was a quiet truth they didn't realize I had recorded. Not for revenge, at least not then, but out of habit, responsibility, and maybe fear of forgetting. I closed the notebook gently, almost ceremoniously, and placed it on top of the folder. A soft knock startled me. Not on my door. On my heart, the sudden realization that I wasn't just collecting documents. I was reclaiming myself. My voice. My years. My worth. I took a deep breath. The rain outside turned heavier, making soft tapping sounds against the window. I stood up and pulled the curtain back. Cars rushed by on the highway, their headlights reflecting off the wet pavement. Everything looked blurred, like the world was still figuring itself out. My phone buzzed again. This time my sister. "If you're upset, that's on you. You should have known it was time to move out." I blinked slowly. For years I had tolerated her tone. Dismissive, entitled, self-centered. Tonight, though, something in me hardened. Her message didn't wound me. It clarified something. She believed the house was hers. She believed my contributions were favors. She believed pushing me out was easy. She believed wrong. I typed nothing back. I simply set the phone aside again and reopened the folder. My hands moved with more certainty now, separating the strongest documents, stacking them neatly, preparing them like chess pieces. Then, without hesitating, I pulled out the USB drive. On it were digital copies of everything, every statement, every invoice, every scanned document. I had backed them up last year without any particular purpose. Now it felt like instinct had protected me long before I knew I needed protecting. A faint smile tugged at my mouth. Not the smile of victory, the smile of someone who finally recognized her own strength. Around midnight, I changed into soft pajamas and settled onto the bed with my laptop. The motel pillow smelled faintly of detergent and something floral. Thunder rolled in the distance, not loud, just enough to remind me a storm was still building somewhere above. I opened a simple search bar and typed, "property contribution rights when living with family." Dozens of results appeared. I read methodically, scrolling slowly, absorbing each line. The more I read, the more my pulse steadied. Everything made sense. Everything lined up. Everything I had documented, every dollar spent, every repair paid, every tax covered, mattered more than my family ever wanted to admit. By the time I closed the laptop, a soft warmth spread through my chest. Not happiness. Not relief. Something more powerful. Understanding. I had leverage. I had proof. I had rights. And they didn't know it. The next morning I dressed in my navy cardigan, the one that made me feel composed, and tied my hair back. The air was crisp when I stepped outside, still carrying the faint scent of last night's rain. I drove to a small legal office in the old downtown district. The sign on the window said Family and Property Law. Appointments welcome. The building looked modest, but I felt a strange pull toward it. As if something inside was waiting for me. Inside, the receptionist, a kind woman about my age, looked up with a warm smile. "Do you have an appointment, dear?" "No," I said gently, "but I have documents." She chuckled softly. "That's usually enough. Have a seat. Someone will help you." I sat on the cushioned bench, smoothing my skirt, holding my folder tightly in my lap. My heart didn't race. My palms didn't sweat. I just felt ready. Minutes later, a man in his early 50s stepped into the waiting room. "I'm Mark. Come on back." His office smelled of old books and fresh coffee. I sat across from him and placed the folder on the table, sliding it toward him without a word. He opened it. His eyebrows lifted. He flipped through page after page, nodding slowly, occasionally making a soft hum of approval. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm and confident. "You've documented everything. That's excellent." I folded my hands in my lap. "I didn't do it for this. But now, it seems relevant." He nodded. "It is. Very. With this much contribution, you have the right to a legal claim. You may have partial ownership without even realizing it." A slow breath left my lungs. "Partial ownership?" He leaned back, interlocking his fingers. "More than they ever expected you to have." My heart didn't leap, it settled. Everything was beginning to align. My sister thought she'd won. Mom thought they'd forced me out. They both believed I had walked away empty-handed. But this folder, this quiet paper trail they dismissed for years, was the beginning of something they never saw coming. Mark closed the folder gently. "Tell me what outcome you're hoping for," he said. I looked at him, steady, unshaken, and whispered the only honest answer I had. "I want what's fair." And the moment the words left my lips, I realized. Fairness was about to become the storm my sister feared and never prepared for. And the first raindrop fell 3 mornings later, just as the sun was beginning to warm the street outside their house. I was sitting in my car across the road, half hidden beneath a row of maple trees whose leaves flickered gold in the light. My coffee sat untouched in the cup holder, slowly losing heat. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't excited. I simply felt steady. Like the ground beneath me had finally stopped shifting. At exactly 9:14 a.m., the white county vehicle rolled to a slow stop in front of the driveway. A uniformed officer stepped out, holding a clipboard and a stack of notices tucked neatly under his arm. He moved with calm purpose, the way people do when they've done the same task 100 times. My breath eased out in a slow, quiet stream. He walked up the pathway, the same pathway I once swept, weeded, and decorated with fall pumpkins each year, and paused at the front door. He glanced around, confirming he had the right house, then pulled out a strip of blue tape. One clean motion. The notice went up. A legal freeze. No sale. No transfer. No renovations. No moral victory for my sister. The officer tapped the paper flat with the back of his hand, then stepped away without looking back. A few seconds later, the front door swung open. My sister appeared first, hair unbrushed, wearing an oversized sweatshirt she usually stole from my closet. She squinted at the notice, her eyebrows folding tight, as if the letters were written in another language. She read the first few lines. Then again. A third time. Her jaw slowly dropped. She snatched the paper off the door, her fingers crumpling the edges as she scanned it again, faster now, desperate. Her voice cracked the quiet morning with a sharp, startled shout. "Mom. What is this?" My mother appeared behind her, adjusting her glasses as she stepped into the sunlight. She took the paper from my sister's shaking hand, her eyes darting left to right, left to right. The color drained from her face. Who did this?" she whispered. I didn't wait for them to guess. I opened my car door and took a single step out. The sound made both of them snap their heads in my direction. My sister held the wrinkled notice like a weapon she didn't know how to use. I walked toward the house slowly, purposefully. The cool morning air brushed against my cheeks, carrying the light scent of cut grass and the distant aroma of someone's cinnamon oatmeal drifting from an open window down the street. My sister practically marched down the driveway toward me, waving the notice in the air. "You did this. Are you insane? What is wrong with you?" Her voice had that familiar shrill pitch, the one she used whenever life didn't bend around her comfort. I stopped a few feet away, hands loosely at my sides. "It's a legal acknowledgement," I said softly, "of what I've contributed." "You're lying," she snapped. "We never." "You never paid," I interrupted gently. "That's what the documents say. That's what the trail shows." She blinked. A small flicker of fear crossed her face, too quick for her to hide. Mom stepped forward, eyes glassy. "You didn't need to go this far. We could have talked." My chest tightened, not with regret but with the memory of how many times I tried to talk before. How often my voice was dismissed or softened or translated into something more convenient for them. "We had that chance," I said. 3 days ago." My sister scoffed. "Oh please. You're doing this because you're jealous. Because Mom chose me over you. That's what this is." I looked at her for a long moment. Really looked at her. The entitlement. The certainty. The belief that the world owed her comfort simply because she wanted it. "No," I said quietly. "I'm doing this because I finally chose myself." Her face twisted in confusion, anger, disbelief. A cocktail of emotions she wasn't used to feeling all at once. The wind picked up, fluttering the edges of the notice still gripped in her hand. She stared at it again as if hoping the words would change. "This says we can't make any changes to the house," she said, voice rising. "We can't renovate. We can't refinance. We can't do anything without your consent." "That's what a freeze does," I said calmly. Mom stepped closer, her voice trembling. "Honey, we're family. Why would you do this to us?" The ache in her tone tugged at something deep inside me, but not deeply enough to undo what I knew I had to do. "For years," I said, "I gave and you took. This is the first time I've asked for anything to be fair." My sister scoffed loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "Fair? Fair? You could have talked to us privately instead of humiliating us like this." I tilted my head slightly. "Did I humiliate you? Or did the truth just catch up to you?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again. No comeback ready, no defense rehearsed. A small victory, but an important one. I took a step closer to the door, looking past them into the home I once helped keep warm, functional, stable. The living room was still messy from the gathering days before. Mugs on the table, blankets tossed aside, crumbs on the carpet. My sister had always been quick to enjoy spaces but slow to maintain them. "Did you think I would just disappear quietly?" I asked, keeping my tone light, almost gentle. She glared at me, eyes sharp. "Yes. That's exactly what I thought." Her honesty surprised even her. Mom shot her a warning look. But I smiled a little, a tired, knowing smile. "Then you didn't know me at all." A soft gasp escaped Mom's lips. Her hand went to her chest the way it always did when she realized something too late. My sister pointed a finger at me, her whole arm trembling. "You're going to regret this." I shook my head. "I regret staying quiet for so long." A tense silence fell between us. Even the birds seemed to pause. I shifted my gaze toward the notice, now crumpled and bent. "You should put that back on the door," I said softly. "It's legally required to stay visible." She looked at it, then at me, then at the door, as if each option was worse than the last. Mom finally spoke again, voice small. What happens now?" I didn't respond right away. I let the question hang in the air, giving it the weight it deserved. A breeze rustled through the maple branches above us, scattering a few leaves across the driveway. Finally, I said, "How we follow the process." My sister's shoulders tensed. "Process? You'll be notified," I replied calmly. "In writing." The fear she tried so desperately to hide flickered again, brighter this time. I turned slightly, preparing to walk back to my car, but Mom reached out and touched my arm gently. "Wait. Please." Her hand was warm, trembling. A mother's touch, but years too late. "Can't we fix this?" she whispered. I looked into her eyes, the same eyes that once softened at my scraped knees and bedtime stories. And for a moment I felt a tug of something old and familiar. But then I remembered the tilted photo frame, the burned cinnamon rolls, the laughter when she told me to move out like I was disposable. "I'm not breaking the family," I said. "I'm just refusing to let the family break me anymore." Mom's hand slipped away. My sister stood frozen in the driveway, gripping the notice like a lifeline she didn't know how to use. I stepped back, slow and steady, feeling the weight of the moment settle over all three of us. This is only the beginning, my sister hissed. I nodded once calmly. Yes. It is. And as I turned toward my car, a distant rumble of thunder echoed in the sky, not loud but deep enough to feel in the chest. Storm was coming. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one unprepared. No time jumps, no recaps, no future foreshadowing, just a seamless continuation into the courtroom scene. Storm was coming. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one unprepared. That truth settled deep in my chest the morning I walked into the courthouse, the cold metal handle cool beneath my palm. The building smelled faintly of old wood and floor polish, the kind of scent that reminded me of libraries, places where truths were kept whether people wanted them or not. The hallway outside the courtroom was quieter than I expected. A few people sat on benches, clutching folders or whispering to attorneys. My hands felt steady around my own folder, the same one I had organized in the motel room, its corners now softened from use. I smoothed the front of my navy cardigan and took a deep breath. The air tasted like anticipation and dust. My attorney, Mark, appeared at the other end of the hall, giving me a small nod. "Morning," he said softly, adjusting the papers in his own file. His voice always carried a calm confidence, as though nothing surprised him anymore. "You ready?" "As ready as I can be," I answered. We walked toward the courtroom together. With each step, the floor creaked gently under my shoes. My heartbeat didn't race. It pulsed slow and measured, like the soft thud of a distant drum. When we reached the doors, Mark pushed one open and the warm air inside greeted us immediately. My sister was already there. She sat near the front, tapping her foot in sharp, impatient bursts. Her hair was curled too tightly, as if she hoped perfect spirals would grant her innocence. Mom sat beside her, wringing a tissue between her fingers until it looked like shredded cotton. They both turned when they heard the door. My sister's eyes narrowed instantly. Mom's eyes softened, searching my face for anger or forgiveness. I offered neither. I took my seat beside Mark, setting my folder on the table with care. The wood felt smooth beneath my fingertips, polished by years of hands before mine. The judge hadn't arrived yet, but the courtroom already held an air of restrained tension, like a room waiting for lightning to strike. My sister leaned toward Mom, whispering something. Mom responded with a gentle shake of her head, but the worry in her eyes deepened. The overhead lights buzzed faintly. A clerk shuffled papers near the judge's bench. Somewhere behind me, a man cleared his throat. Then the door behind the bench opened. The judge entered, a tall man with silver hair and an expression carved from decades of listening, deciding, and carrying the weight of other people's truths. Everyone rose. The room filled with the soft rustle of clothing and shifting chairs. "You may be seated," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. We sat. The clerk began reading the case details, her voice echoing crisply against the wooden walls. I watched the judge as she spoke. He listened with a stillness I admired, attentive but not emotional, engaged but not influenced. His eyes drifted briefly toward me, then to my sister, then back to the clerk. When it was Mark's turn to speak, he rose smoothly. "Your Honor," he began, "we are here today to address the matter of financial contribution and equitable interest regarding the property at—" My sister interrupted before he could finish. "This is ridiculous," she blurted out, loud enough to draw a few startled looks. "She's doing this because she's bitter. That house is ours. She's just trying to make trouble." The judge lifted one eyebrow, a small but unmistakable warning. "You will have your chance to speak," he said simply. My sister sank back into her chair, crossing her arms with a huff. Mom placed a gentle hand on her arm, whispering something that made her shoulders lower, but not by much. Mark continued as though nothing had happened. "We have documented evidence showing significant financial contributions made by my client over a period of 5 years. These include repairs, taxes, property upkeep, and household expenses that exceeded normal support or goodwill. Furthermore," he opened the folder and slid out the first set of documents. I watched the judge's eyes move across the page, slowly, carefully, thoughtfully. He flipped to the next page. Then the next. His brow furrowed slightly and he leaned back, tapping the edge of the paper against the bench. "Miss Harris," he said, addressing me for the first time, "you've kept detailed records." "Yes, Your Honor," I replied, my voice steady. "I didn't plan for this. But I didn't forget what I paid." He nodded once. It appears you didn't. My sister shot up from her seat before Mom could stop her. Those don't mean anything. She paid because she wanted to. He volunteered. She's trying to twist everything now. The judge pressed his lips into a firm line. Sit down, he said. Not unkindly, but with authority that left no room for disobedience. My sister sat, cheeks flushed, eyes burning with anger she had no place to put. Mark continued laying out the evidence. The heater repair invoice, the roofing bill, the property tax receipts, each one marked with my bank statements. The judge examined every document with a quiet seriousness that made the room feel even stiller. A few feet away, my sister fidgeted with the edge of her sleeve, biting the inside of her cheek. Mom clasped her hands together so tightly the knuckles turned pale. I could feel their tension, a dense fog surrounding them, thickened by panic and disbelief. When Mark finished, the judge turned to my sister. Do you have documentation showing your contributions to the property? He asked. She froze, caught like a deer in headlights. Well, we paid other things. Just not those things. What things? The judge asked gently. She opened her mouth, but no words followed. He waited. Nothing. My sister's eyes darted toward Mom, her panic growing. Mom placed a trembling hand on her knee, but it wasn't enough to give her a story that didn't exist. When the silence became too heavy to ignore, the judge spoke again. Very well. We'll proceed. I clasped my hands in my lap. My pulse remained steady, a quiet strength spreading through my chest. This moment wasn't revenge. It was truth stepping forward in a room where truth mattered. The judge tapped his pen lightly on the desk. Based on the evidence presented and the lack of contradictory documentation, it is clear that substantial financial responsibility rested on the petitioner. He paused. The pattern of payment suggests reliance and expectation beyond goodwill. Therefore, my sister shot up again. Are you kidding me? She's doing this to punish us. Sit, the judge repeated, firmer this time. Mom tugged her back into the seat with a whisper. Stop. The judge looked directly at me. Ms. Harris, do you understand that this ruling may impact the current occupants significantly? I do, Your Honor, I said quietly. I also understand that my years of contribution were dismissed until now. His gaze softened almost imperceptibly. Not sympathy, acknowledgement. He took a breath and delivered the ruling. This court recognizes the petitioner's equitable interest in the property. A repayment arrangement is appropriate and will be enforced. Furthermore, any structural, financial, or ownership changes will require her documented consent. A ripple moved across the courtroom, not audible but emotional. Mom let out a soft gasp. My sister's mouth fell open, her eyes filling with a mixture of outrage and disbelief. You can't do this, she whispered. You can't. The judge closed the file. I can. And I have. Mark placed a gentle hand near mine on the table, not touching but steadying. Well done, he murmured. I didn't feel triumph. Not yet. What I felt was something deeper, like a door that had been closed on me for years had finally cracked open. The judge dismissed the case and the bailiff called the next number. Chairs scraped softly across the floor as people stood and filed out. The hum of conversations swelled in the hallway beyond. As I gathered my papers, my sister approached, anger shaking her voice but quieter than before. You just ruined everything, she said. I looked up at her, meeting her eyes with a calm I'd earned the hard way. No, I said softly. I just revealed everything. Mom stepped forward, tears glistening. We didn't know you felt so alone, she whispered. We should have paid attention. You should have, I replied gently. And for the first time they had no argument left. As I turned to leave the courtroom, the morning sun streamed through the high windows, casting long beams of light across the floor. Dust floated gently in the rays, dancing in the warm glow. I stepped into that light, feeling something in me finally ease. Not victory. Not revenge. Truth. And truth, spoken aloud in a room built for justice, was its own kind of power. That thought stayed with me as I stepped out of the courthouse and into the late morning light. The sun had climbed higher, warm enough to soften the chill in the air but not enough to melt the tension still clinging to my shoulders. People moved past me on the sidewalk, each carrying their own stories, their own battles, unaware of the shift that had just taken place inside me. The world felt strangely new. Mark walked beside me for a moment, his steps measured. "If you need anything else, paperwork, follow-ups, just call," he said. "I will," I told him. "Thank you." He gave me a respectful nod before heading toward the parking lot. I watched him leave, then inhaled deeply, letting the scent of warm asphalt and distant bakery sugar linger in my lungs. My hands tightened briefly around the folder. Not in fear, not in anger, but in recognition. This small stack of papers had carried me further than kindness ever had. My sister and Mom exited the courthouse behind me. Their footsteps were unmistakable, hurried, uneven, thick with emotion. I didn't turn until they were close enough that I could feel my sister's stare burn the back of my neck. When I finally faced them, her voice cracked before she could steady it. "You really think you won, don't you?" I didn't answer right away. Victory felt like the wrong word. What I felt was alignment, the world finally reflecting the truth I had lived in for years. "I didn't come here to win," I said softly. "I came here to stop losing." Mom pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting back tears. She stepped forward, but this time, instead of guilt or defense, her eyes held something I hadn't seen in a long time: humility. "I didn't realize how far things had gone," she whispered. "We took advantage of your kindness. I see that now." I studied her face, the lines deepened by years of caregiving and conflict. I remembered moments when she had been gentle, moments when she had been thoughtless, moments when she had been both at the same time. I didn't doubt she meant what she said, but truth had already spoken for me in that courtroom. There was nothing left for me to prove. "You saw what you wanted to see," I replied quietly, and ignored the rest. My sister scoffed, shaking her head. "This isn't over." I gave her a small, tired smile. "I know. That's why there's a repayment plan." Her mouth opened, but she had no words, just the bitter taste of consequences she never expected to taste. I turned away from them and walked toward my car. Each step felt lighter, as if the weight that had pressed on me for years was finally shifting off my back. When I reached the driver's door, I paused and looked at the courthouse behind me, the columns gleaming, the steps wide and steady. Funny how a building I once feared now felt like the safest place I had ever walked into. Inside my car, I sat still for a moment, letting the silence settle around me like a blanket. My heart thudded softly, calm and sure. I rested my hand on the steering wheel and exhaled, long and steady. Not all storms end with thunder. Some end with clarity. I drove home, not to their house but to the small rental apartment I had found near the old library. It wasn't large, but it was warm. Quiet. When I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the faint scent of lavender from last night's candle greeted me. My small table stood by the window, sunlight pooling over it like honey. My favorite chair waited in the corner, draped with the soft blue blanket my grandmother had sewn decades ago. Home didn't need to be big. It needed to be honest. I placed the folder on the table and opened the windows to let the fresh air sweep in. The curtains fluttered like gentle breath. I made myself a cup of tea, chamomile with a hint of lemon, and stood by the window watching the world outside move without hurry. The phone buzzed. A message from Mom. "Can we talk when you're ready? I want to understand." I typed a simple reply. "Maybe soon." Not yes, not no, just space. The kind I had earned. Later that afternoon I drove past the old house. Not to confront them, just to see it from a different angle with different eyes. The legal notice was taped neatly again to the front door, smoother this time, the blue tape pressed carefully along the edges. The house looked quieter than usual. The curtains were closed, the porch light off despite the dimming sky. Even the flowers in the front yard seemed to lean away from the house, wilted and tired. A subtle ache stirred behind my ribs, not regret, not nostalgia, but release. A letting go I didn't know I was ready for. As I began to drive away, the front door opened. My sister stepped out, sweater wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She spotted my car immediately. Her expression shifted through a dozen emotions before landing on one I'd never seen on her face: uncertainty. She took a small step toward the driveway, then stopped. "Are you happy now?" she called, her voice trembling. I rolled the window down halfway. "This isn't about happiness," I said. "It's about balance. You took everything from me." I shook my head. "No. I took responsibility for myself. The rest was never yours to keep." She blinked rapidly, biting her lip as though holding back something sharper than tears. You changed, she whispered. I smiled gently. No. I finally stopped hiding. The wind shifted then, rustling the leaves on the ground. A soft gust blew her hair across her cheek, and for the first time since childhood she looked small, not because she was powerless, but because she was unprepared for a world where I no longer shrank for her comfort. I drove away. Not quickly. Just steadily. That night at home again I sat at my small table with a pen and a blank sheet of paper. I hadn't written a letter in years, but something inside me needed to speak without interruption. I wrote to myself. I wrote about the years I spent giving more than I had. I wrote about the quiet hurts I swallowed to keep peace. I wrote about the woman I used to be, the one who tiptoed around conflict, who accepted crumbs, who believed love meant silence. And then I wrote about the woman I became. The one who kept records. The one who listened to her own voice. The one who walked into a courtroom with her head held high. The one who no longer feared being alone because she finally understood the difference between loneliness and peace. When I finished, I folded the letter neatly and tucked it into the front pocket of the folder. Not for anyone else to read, just for me in case I ever forgot what it took to get here. Weeks passed. The repayment plan began, quietly, formally, without dramatics. My sister dropped off the first envelope at the courthouse payment box with shaking hands. I didn't see it happen, but I imagined her doing it. It was not a moment of cruelty. It was a moment of accountability. Mom called me once a week, her voice softer each time, less defensive, more reflective. She apologized without excuses. She listened without correcting. She asked questions that didn't sting. Healing, I realized, wasn't loud either. One cool morning, I took a walk through the neighborhood near my new apartment. The leaves had started to turn gold around the edges. Children hurried past with backpacks. A dog barked somewhere behind a fence, and the air smelled of cinnamon from a nearby bakery. For the first time in a long time, my steps didn't feel heavy. I reached the small park at the end of the street and sat on a bench beneath an old oak tree. Sunlight spilled through the branches, forming warm patches on my hands. I closed my eyes, letting the breeze brush my cheeks. I didn't need applause. I didn't need validation. I didn't need them to say I was right. My victory lived in quieter places. In the steady beat of my heart. In the peace of my own home. In the knowledge that I could stand alone and not fall. And as I opened my eyes and watched the sunlight filter through the leaves, I realized something with a soft, powerful certainty. Revenge didn't make me stronger. Remembering myself did. I stood, tucking my hands into my pockets, the world warming around me. I turned toward home, my home, with a gentle, settled smile. Some victories are shouted. Mine didn't need to be. Mine was quiet. Mine was earned. And mine was finally mine. If this story touched you, if you've ever felt overlooked or pushed aside, you're not alone. Subscribe for more stories that bring truth, justice, and strength back to women like us.